Everyone keeps waiting for the breakthrough in Iran-US relations. Talks scheduled, diplomats briefed, optimism cautiously building, and then Iran pulls out, not after the talks collapsed, before they even began. That's not a negotiating failure, that's a signal. So the real question is, what exactly is Iran communicating and to whom? This is independent geopolitical analysis and personal opinion only. All information is based on publicly available reports. I could be wrong. Here's the background quickly. According to publicly available reports from Reuters, Al Jazeera, and the Associated Press, Iran and the United States had been moving toward indirect diplomatic talks largely over Iran's nuclear program, which has been a major flashpoint since the U.S. withdrew from the 2015 nuclear deal. Under the Trump administration, Iran's nuclear enrichment has since accelerated dramatically. International inspectors have reported uranium enrichment levels approaching weapons-grade thresholds. Meanwhile, US and Israeli pressure has intensified. Talks were reportedly scheduled through Omani intermediaries. Oman has historically played the quiet broker between Washington and Tehran. Then Iran announced it would not attend. The reason cited, US hostile actions. The timing, just as diplomatic groundwork appeared to be laid. That's what happened. Now here's what I think is really happening. Iran didn't walk away because talks failed. Iran walked away to avoid a trap. Think about the position Tehran is in right now. Domestically, the regime is under enormous internal pressure. Economic sanctions have crippled the currency. Youth protests have not disappeared, they've gone quiet, which is different. Any agreement with Washington risks looking like capitulation to a deeply skeptical public. But there's a second layer here. Internationally, Iran has spent years cultivating leverage through its nuclear program, through regional proxies, through its partnerships with Russia and China. Entering talks before extracting any preliminary concessions would mean giving up that leverage before the game even starts. So the rejection isn't irrational. It's actually quite calculated. Iran is telling Washington, you want these talks, you pay for the entry ticket first. The hostile actions framing matters too. It keeps the door open while assigning blame. Iran can say it wants peace, just not. Under these conditions, that's a negotiating posture, not a final answer. But here's where it gets interesting. Most analysis focuses on the bilateral relationship Iran versus the US, that misses something important. This rejection sends a signal to at least for other audiences simultaneously. First, Israel. Tehran is demonstrating that it will not be pushed to the table through pressure alone, that military threats or sanctions don't automatically produce compliance. That matters enormously for how Israel reads the threat environment. Second, Russia and China. Both have positioned themselves as Iran's strategic alternatives to Western engagement. Every time Iran rejects Washington, it deepens those partnerships and validates Beijing. And Moscow's framing that U.S. diplomacy is coercive, not genuine. Third, the Gulf states Saudi Arabia, the way who have been cautiously recalibrating their own relationships with Iran. They're watching to see whether Washington's diplomatic overtures have any real weight, or whether the region needs to manage Iran on its own terms. Fourth, Iran's own hardline factions. The Revolutionary Guard and conservative elements within the regime have never been comfortable with US engagement. Publicly rejecting talks is a way of managing those internal fault lines without letting them fracture. Most people are missing this. This isn't just about nukes and sanctions. It's about who controls the narrative in a rapidly reshaping Middle East. Here's my reasoned prediction, and I want to be clear. This is analysis, not certainty. Iran will not permanently close the door. That's not how Tehran operates. The rejection buys time, builds leverage, and tests Washington's patience. But Iran also understands that a nuclear program without any diplomatic cover becomes a unifying justification for military action, something the regime wants to avoid. So expect a pattern: rejection, escalation, back-channel contact, tentative re-engagement. This is the rhythm of Iran-US diplomacy going back decades. The variable that changes everything is the U.S. domestic calendar, if Washington faces pressure to show diplomatic wins, or alternatively, if hardline political wins push toward confrontation, the calculus shifts. Iran is watching that very carefully. There's also a nuclear threshold question looming. If enrichment crosses certain technical markers, the window for diplomacy narrows sharply, not because anyone necessarily wants conflict, but because the risk calculus changes for every actor involved. The most likely near-term trajectory: a return to indirect talks within 60 to 90 days, possibly with some quiet US concession, a frozen asset release, a sanctions carve-out offered through back channels to give Tehran a justification for re-engagement without losing face. Watch for Oman to become active again. that's usually the first indicator that the conversation has quietly resumed. If this analysis is correct, here are 3 concrete things to watch over the next 30 to 60 days. First, Omani diplomatic activity. Any movement by Muscat, a visit, a statement, a quiet shift in posture suggests back-channel contact has resumed between Washington and Tehran. Second, U.S. Treasury and sanctions signals. A quiet easing of enforcement, particularly around frozen Iranian assets or oil export pressure, would be Washington's way of lowering the temperature without making a public concession. Third, IAEA reporting. If Iran allows broader inspection access, even marginally, that's a signal it's trying to avoid triggering automatic escalation. Mechanisms which suggests it still values the diplomatic track, whatever its public posture says. If none of those signals emerge within 60 days, then this rejection may be harder than it looks and the risk of a more serious escalation cycle increases meaningfully. This is independent analysis only, not news. I could be wrong, and I genuinely encourage you to question everything I've said here. If you want geopolitical breakdowns that go deeper than the headlines, subscribe, new analysis every week, and I want to hear from you. Do you think Iran will return to the table, or is this rejection something more permanent? Drop your analysis in the comments. All information in this video is based on publicly available reports and represents personal opinion and analysis only.